Hello everybody, my name is Squaggy, and let's talk about some results. Today was Chiho Cup Aichi. I put Nagoya in my Twitter post, but I think it is Aichi? I'll have to double check that. In any case, for the purpose of this video, what you need to know is that this is the first big WGP since both set 13 have come out and the Kai and Aichi start decks. This means it's our first to look into kind of what a new meta is shaping up to be. And so far, the results are, well, not unexpected, but they are cool to look at. I love looking at new results. I think it gives us pretty good insight into what players think are really good, and also it gives you insight into what you may encounter when you go to your next big tournament. Furthermore, once we look at top cut and stuff, you can see what kind of decks are good enough to handle a big event like this. This tournament has more than 1,100 players going through, I think, 11 rounds of Swiss. So really crazy. In order to make top cut, you're gonna have to need In order to make top cut, you're gonna need to have a really good win record. A lot of people showed up for day 1, made it to day 2, and then dropped out before they even made it to top cut. That's just kind of how intense a tournament like this can be. So if you made it there, congratulations if you're watching this. You may only speak Japanese, but congratulations. But it does mean that most of the decks that make it there are not flukes. So we should have a pretty good insight as to what decks are gonna be quite strong going into this next format. Firstly, right now on screen, this is the overall play rate of every deck. As you can see, the most represented deck in the room is Deep Lands, Set 12's strongest deck, and possibly the strongest deck in the format right now. You may be familiar with it with its 6 attacks going first on turn 3, the ability to leverage triggers really well because both the Vanguard swings will retain triggers, and a really good resource game with the Order card. It's Energy Blast 2, and the fact that just everything kind of makes another guy and you can use Harvest Elf to draw a bunch of cards. This deck is both resource efficient and pretty aggressive as well. In second place for play rate is obviously Virgilla. Virgilla is one of the most consistent decks in the game. It's really strong, and it has a really high sacking potential because it has Drag Vita. It even has a bit of board interference to deal with Deep Lands and stuff, and the counterblade to that is that Deep Lands can stun something like Ezawar to stop Virgilla from having high guard. So these two decks are kind of the decks to beat in the room, and they have a pretty interesting matchup against one another, but a lot of that comes down to kind of trigger luck as well. In third place is Heartluru. You are familiar with Heartluru by now, but you may notice later on that Heartluru has a bit of a fall off. Then we have the Kai decks, which are all the Overlord decks, and these make up a pretty sizable chunk of the population. I think a lot of us knew going into the format that Kai was going to be very strong. The card quality is very high in archetype. Dragon Empire has pretty good generic tools, so it's no surprise that people also thought that it would do great. Then Odium at 7%, with the new Liael Animus also is making some big waves, and the rest are more fringe. You may notice that some of the top decks that we've talked about beforehand, like Minerva, Rewinder, for me, I thought Berucrea was going to do really well. I thought Jiva and Magnolia was going to do pretty well. But, they're not as popular as the rest of them. This can be because, something like accessibility, perhaps. Odium and Kai are pretty easy to access because they have trial decks available. It can be perceived power. Obviously, people are going to perceive stuff like Heartluru, Deep Lands, and Virgilla really highly. And of course, let's not pretend there isn't some new toy syndrome going on with Magnolia, with Alfred, with Kai. These are new decks that they may not really have the power threshold, but they are going to be brought because they're new and they're fun to play with. Why does that matter? Well, you're not going to immediately start every tournament in top cut where only the good decks are filtered out. Many of the decks that you don't consider good or that we consider rogue just have kind of iffy matchups into these top tables, or they're a bit less consistent and thus can't see a win completely. But if you're going to a big tournament, it is pretty important to consider what a play rate might look like for a deck, because that's going to determine whether or not you should or should not prep for it. You only have so much time to test decks, you only have so much time to Google what a deck does and see what the lines are for other decks, and sometimes you may want to run a tech that will not fit for certain matchups, but will fit really well in others. When that happens, you're going to want to be able to make sure you know when your techs are useful, when they aren't, etc, etc. Which is why play rate is a lot more useful for a lot of players than it will be like actual strength, because a meta game is just what people perceive to be good enough to bring to a tournament, not necessarily a direct one-to-one comparison of what reality's power lines are for each deck. Basically, just because a lot of people are bringing Liael Draconis, that doesn't necessitate that the deck is very good. I think it's pretty good, but based on how the deck converts, there's some disagreement with that. So let's look here at this top 32. If you can't read the names, don't worry, from left to right, that's how they are numbered, right? So the first one is Virgilla, second is Deep Lands, so on and so forth. You may notice that over here, Deep Lands has 2% more of the population playing it, and yet Virgilla still has a higher conversion rate. What does that mean? Who knows? But what we expected to be good is kind of there. Surprisingly, Heartluru and Dragonic Overlord both have similar conversion rates. I say surprisingly because I thought Dragonic Overlord was going to do a lot better, and I thought Heartluru was going to do a lot worse, but no, they actually do convert similarly. Odium actually converts pretty well, relatively speaking, to these two, also having 3 people make it the top cut, despite having 4% of the population bring her. This may suggest that Odium is a bit better than we expect, or at the very least Odium has a pretty high sack potential. Finally, something I think a lot of people may be excited to see, Luard. Stride decks don't tend to be very good this format, but 2 Luards made it to top cut. Alongside fan favorite decks like Prison, Jiva made it, which is great. Rewinder made it. I always consider Rewinder a top tier threat. The person who brought Rewinder went, I think, 11-1, only losing in top cut. They went undefeated the whole of Swiss. They were the #1 Swiss ranked player, but the list isn't anything super interesting, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But just so you know, Rewinder is very potent. Finally, Swaggy has to get something wrong every time they evaluate the set. Blangdmire Fantome is doing quite well. They were brought to the World's Finals if you kept up with that, but this, however, is an 11-round tournament. They made it through all the way through Swiss. Blangdmire Fantome may have more teeth than I initially thought. Willing to be wrong on that. Always happy to see new decks kind of get into higher representation. And finally, Berucrea made it too. That's fun. I've always known Berucrea was pretty good. The list that this person brought was very interesting, and we'll talk about some of them later. For now, this is what a top cut looks like. This may be more accurate to understanding how we view power in the card game. If a deck converts really well into top cut like Virgilla and Deep Lens, we can assume that these decks are really good. Conversely, Draconis has a decently high play rate to the point of being on the pie chart, and yet doesn't convert at all. This may imply to us that Draconis is not as good as we may anticipate it to be, or that a lot of people are playing it because it's fun and it's new. Those are all fair reasons to play it, but it may not be an accurate representation as to what the deck's strength actually is. And to be clear, if you've made it to top 32 or like a really good win rate at all, that's a great showing for this tournament. For such a high sample size, this is really good showing. This is probably a pretty accurate representation of what strong decks may look like, quote-unquote strong decks, right? I'm not saying definitively that these decks here are the strongest in the format. I'm just saying that they are powerful enough to take it home to go to really high tables in large events. Alright, that out of the way. Let's talk about top 8. Before the video continues, I just want to advertise, I do have a Ko-Fi. I'm not going to paywall any content. Obviously, I don't really have a lot to paywall. But if you'd like to support the channel and what I do, and you want to see me, maybe try to upload a bit more regularly, maybe improve this microphone of mine, then any help would be appreciated. You don't have to donate. Just want to put it out there in case you do want to support the channel and what I do. Okay, back to the video. In top 8, we have a pretty diverse spread. I know we like to joke that, Virgilla is always winning and so is Deep Lens these days, but actually, everyone at top cut is different. There isn't a single duplicate here. There's one Odium, there's one Overlord, there's one Virgilla, there's one Prison, there's one Luard, one Minerva, one Berucrea even. That's pretty cool. I don't think we've had something like this in a long while, and it's kind of refreshing to see. Your mileage may vary as to how interesting you find these decks. I don't particularly find them amazingly interesting, I guess. At least shows that different deck types can win, different aesthetics can do well, and this is something that is cool. You can watch a couple of the top games as well on YouTube. I've left the link to the stream below, like the stream VOD, so do check that out if you are interested in some of the games. And let's talk about some of the lists here as well. I'm about to show you a bunch of lists for the more interesting decks that have topped. Not necessarily top 8, but top 32 as well. Just some of the more interesting lists. Rather than showing you, Virgilla and Deep Lens again and again, you know what those decks do. You've seen Prison 1,000 times, and Minerva hasn't changed much either. So, I'll just show you some of the more interesting lists, and then we can talk about why I think these decks, may have been able to make it in such a big event despite not being what we consider meta picks. And in case you're wondering, the top 4 is Minerva, Deep Lens, Virgilla, Odium in that order. So the Luard didn't make it to top 4, the Berucrea didn't make it, and the Kai didn't make it either, nor did the Prison. Okay, let's talk about some of the lists. The first list I want to talk about is this Jiva list. Now, I love Jiva, and you saw that one Jiva converted to top 32, and that's pretty impressive to me. It's also a bit quirkier. I know not a lot of people are really on Jiva, but Jiva has gotten a lot better this set. And that's all thanks to Blaze Maiden Bleshia over here. When you discard this card, you just have to show Jiva in your right deck or any Nirvana, or if you have Nirvana Vanguard, you can Energy Blast 3 and add any one of the overdressed cards to your hand. This is incredible. It means everything is searchable really early. It means stuff like Vils is searchable early. It means stuff like Arcs is searchable early. Card is really good. This deck is also pretty interesting in that it doesn't really play a Regalis piece at all, which may seem kind of crazy, but if you're pretty in tune with how Jiva is built these days, it is not that far off to imagine a Jiva list that doesn't involve a Regalis piece. You have to run a critical mass of Prayer Dragons and the crossover dress units in order to see consistent access to stuff like your Strava Arenas. You have to see both the, actual card you want to play, plus a ton of prayer dragons, so it's not surprising that you're gonna make space for these. Some lists run stuff like Twin Cast, some lists run stuff like a 5 Regalis, which is fine too, but this is pretty cool to see a no Regalis piece at all. Another notable omission is Defensing Roar. Defensing Roar is not in this list at all, and that's pretty interesting because a lot of lists do run Defensing Roar because it's a very efficient card in Dragon Empire to give you a bit of a grind, but I guess this is a more aggressive list for Jiva. The one Buzzsaw over here lets you kind of Soul Blast out the Cindy constantly, so you always have access to getting Cindy procs, and other than that, it's a pretty standard Jiva list for what Jiva is these days. Jiva plays a ton of weird fun-offs because they can all be found off bless, yeah, and that's a really important thing. This is one of the small little buffs that came in set 13 that have helped the deck that didn't necessarily get a new boss, but it has pushed Jiva up quite a fair bit. I know in my tier list video and my evaluation video, I consider Jiva like a low play rate, high power deck, and I think this one top is a little representative of that. It's not crazy where a ton of people are playing it and seeing good success, but one or two people are gonna see success with this deck because it is pretty potent. They're also on the soul fronts. I personally don't really see the reason to run soul fronts over the shield fronts, especially in a deck that doesn't have defensive tools like Defensing Roar or Twin Cast. Maybe it's because you want to make sure you have soul to use stuff like Board pretty often. That could be a reason. It could also maybe be Aparagia stuff. I don't really see it too often, but give it a try. Let me know what you think because, this is something that does elude me a bit, but I'm trying to understand why they might have run it. Next, let's look at this Odium list. This, I believe, is the Odium list that made it to top 4. It is a little standard, but still worth looking at. Notable omissions is the Grade 2 Colossus that comes out of the Gauge zone. They are basically only ever going to gauge Anachronus as your kind of a cycling attacker. They're on Shield Cyclers, which has been pretty popular in Odium recently. Odium's biggest weakness, obviously, is you drive check it to Bane, Anachronus Dragon, and you can't guard. So this kind of smooths out that curve a bit, gives you a bit more early shield to work with, gives you some late shield to work with even. So good card to discard for Ride as well in a deck that doesn't have too many good discards, I guess. Except for you, who I only know you as Steampunk Gojo. This card's really good. On discard, it calls herself back, which works during your Divine Skill turn as well. That doesn't come up too often, but it comes up really often early game, and when you guard with it, it is a 10k shield, which is good. They haven't cut Avarice Wrestler completely. Still a 2-off. Still good to always have enough of these to make sure you can Sword of Bane, and they have the 4 takedown dragons, which are quite expensive, unfortunately. But aside from that, this is a pretty good way to build Odium. At least a good way you can see it, right? Some notable omissions as well are stuff like Philias and the Ace unit. I personally, when I play against Odium a lot, I think the Ace unit and the Philias are really good early game, but a lot of Odium's tools now are already really good early game, and you kind of want to be able to smooth out your curves so you can make it to Animus, because you're always going to be able to make it to your Divine Skill, I think. I think that goes without saying. I think Odium's really tailored these days to get there, but they have to have enough resource to survive the clapback from your opponent, and sometimes on certain builds of Animus, you're just going to check a bunch of grade 3s and you're not going to get there in time. So this is a build I do like. It has slightly higher shield value than you may expect, thanks to stuff like Twin Cast, with the girl here with the 5k shield, with the shield cyclers. I really like the list a lot. I think it's pretty stable. And stability is pretty important, as Odium has a lot of self-destruct conditions in not seeing your Banes, in not seeing Anachronus Dragon, in not seeing Animus. Well, I guess that's not too big of a deal. A lot of ways this deck can self-destruct, and I think this is a really stable way so you never do self-destruct. The highs may not be as high as something like Philia Ace unit, but definitely your floor is much higher in this build. And for an 11 round tournament, sometimes a high floor is more important than a high ceiling. Next up, Blangdmire Fantome. Again, I was wrong about this deck, thought it was a lot worse. Actually, not so bad. This is something that was brought to the World Championship as well, so, you have 2 Blangdmire lists technically who have topped. It's on pretty high quantities of all the archetype stuff, 4, 4, 3, 3 of all the archetype stuff. Persona Ride is maxed out, Kofa Glen is maxed out, 3 Zamuk, and 4 Badakt. These are all really useful, obviously you want to run them. These 2 girlies here, if you do not recognize them, these are Sergon and Tifalt. They're on 1 Cabaret because it makes the 5th attack, and they're on 2 Nebula Knights orders because it's just a better Crimson Moon come late. And a lot of your Crimson Moons are going to go out of game anyways. Plus, filling up your bind zone is also going to speed up Blangdmire stuff. I believe the way I've ever conceptualized Blangdmire is probably wrong. I consider it something like a grindier deck, maybe, with stuff like the Hostage package, when in reality, it is beginning to look more and more like Blangdmire is a very aggressive deck that just happens to have a heal attached to it. And this heal gives you a bit of a safety net into other aggressive strategies like Deep Lands and Virgilla, so I can definitely see why this deck is doing quite well. Also, very shiny list. I believe this is the max rarity possible? Maybe not signed fronts, I guess. Other omissions from this list, Hostage package is one of them. Sometimes people run the Hostage package. In the World Championship tournament, I believe the player brought Amorda into the deck. Now, Amorda can't actually do her Perfect Guard card skill in Blangdmire, but you can cycle 2 cards from your bind zone to your deck, and that can be stuff like heals, like crits, like your OT, and I guess that player found it useful. You may too, I guess this one didn't, and they saw success anyways. Just to initiate the unfamiliar, because I know I was, when Blangdmire swings, you can call out Carebrave from the bind zone. Then with his Counterblast and Soul Blast, you can call 1 card from your deck as well, making a 5 attack turn over Blangdmire's usual 4. That might be something you find a bit more helpful, and if you can't find it, just play the 4 Zamug, I guess. Other than that, cool stuff. I love seeing newer decks take top spots. Between this and Jiva, I think it's a good time to talk about how we talk about decks. Now, when I say these decks in top 32 are good / they could be an accurate representation to real life as to what is good, that may not be the case for you, right? For some people, a good deck is something that hits top 4 consistently, that hits top 16 consistently. It's something that has a really high conversion rate. It's something that does better than 1 slot in top 32. These could be flukes, for example. These could be more rogue picks, for example. I don't disagree with that. But just a matter of what you think is good enough. And I think a deck that can make it to top 32 in a 11-round Swiss is a very impressive deck, or at least requires a very impressive pilot, and oftentimes both. Just want to quickly get that out of the way in case you have a different understanding of what is good. For me, that is my definition of good. Being able to make high tops here and there in a large event. That is how I would perceive a good deck. I know some people are like, oh, my deck can go 3-0 at locals. My deck is good. Maybe not. That's where I kind of draw my line. But where you draw your line is completely different from me. Decide for yourself if what I'm saying is sufficient to make you want to pick up the deck or to consider it in your matchup spread. Next up, this really interesting Berucrea list. First of all, the 8 SCCs are necessary. The more SCCs you have, the more triggers you'll check. Aside from that, you can kind of see that the player is going for a bit more of a toolboxy angle with Berucrea. Using cards like Shadow Cloak and Elvina, you can mill your orders to the drop zone. One trick that the player utilized in the event was on stream, they called Shadow Cloak milled Elementaria, because Shadow Cloak can mill any order, not just normal ones, and then Elvina can pick back up Elementaria, because Elvina can pick up any order. And because there aren't a lot of energy sinks in Berucrea sans Trita's shield, Trita's the card here who gains a 10k shield, this is a pretty good way to use your energy. The 2 Harvest Elf can be cycled over and over and over again, just like how you do in something like Deep Lands. And I find Berucrea pretty good. I think it's one of the best decks at sacking your way to victory, just because of the quad drive with no cost. I think the player here really tuned this list to their liking to have a really flexible list. There is no Amiable Fairy, for example, so the power hitters are really Nils Veigar and the Ace unit, and that's it. And they were also on 4 fronts, 2 shield and 2 soul fronts. Berucrea can actually run out of soul pretty often. Because of the way that she works with her magic orders, you have the Soul Blast one to cast the second one. In a Harvest Elf list, you may make the token, and in doing so, you may just kind of lose soul eventually, but this kind of keeps you afloat. And fronts are good in Berucrea because you go Vanguard twice in advance before your rear guard, so you can check them, and then the rest of your sides are really lethal. So really cool to see that this deck is doing well. On a first wave deck, I think this deck is pretty decent already. I think it's also the cheapest thing you can build. Maybe not this build because Shadow Cloak is kind of expensive, if I remember. But there are ways you can build Berucrea in a way that is a bit more affordable. And I think the deck is pretty good. If it gets anything in set 14, I will be surprised if it isn't more secure in its meta position. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. Next up, Dragonic Overlord. Now, I think Overlord is very strong. This is a list here that doesn't run Vortex Dragon, and thus, plays pretty similarly to something like Berucrea. In fact, if you look closely, you may also see there isn't the 5-syllable Dino Dragon I can't pronounce, the Grade 2. Thus, this doesn't have Dino Fest, this doesn't have Beligeric Crow, and I guess the most expensive stuff here is the Shenri, maybe, the Farhart maybe, and depending on your region, I think this is either cheap or pretty expensive. But if you want a kind of budget way to play Overlord, this is clearly a list that worked. Whether or not they sack their way to the top or not is a different thing, but it clearly got them very good results, and it doesn't even use the really expensive generic out there right now. I mean, all generics have some price tag attached to them, but not the super expensive one. This is pretty in-box, Jaran and Tejas. Jaran here will search any card. Tejas is a 15k attacker with 10k shielder, and these two together create a 28k line really early. Berserk Dragon is really good. Nehalem is a very efficient card. The one of Cat can be searched by, Conroe if you really have to, but more often than not, you'll probably be searching for this Scarlet Flame Order. And a deck that can put on so much pressure and is very fast, like Overlord, is good this format. I mean, it's always good to have a fast deck, but Overlord's power and high drive count makes it one of the better picks for players who, you just want to swing face and just declare all center, That's a good thing that Overlord can do. And having a deck that is a bit easier isn't a detriment to your skill. Having a deck that is easier and doesn't have a lot of decision points can be a really important factor in picking your deck for a tournament, because if you pick a deck that is too complicated, like, let's say you play a lot of Zorga, but you take a while on your decision making, you may get a bit fatigued throughout the tournament and you may not do well as a result. Whereas if you're playing Overlord, I mean, I'm swinging phase twice and I'm passing my turn. So look through some of the Overlord lists. I don't have them all pulled up right now, but if I recall, I think none of them use the Grade 2 Dino Dragon. So this could kind of be a good entry point as a quote-unquote budget-y list if you want to get going into competitive. Give it a shot. Finally, I pulled up both Luards because I think a lot of people really like Luard. There was one Luard game on stream. You can go find it if you want to. It's, I think, the first game of top 32. And it was pretty interesting. It was against the Berucrea, and they are both on these high draw lists. Basically running a 6-7 draw, 6-7, and then just grinding out a game using Luard's ability to put cards back into the deck. Periris, I believe her name is. Over here, Periris. Can guard the 5th attack on any board, which is really good into stuff like Heartluru, really good into stuff like Deep Lands. These can stop PG 5th attack or more, which is useful in this format, but not that useful these days. I mean, decks like you just saw the Overlord list that caps out at 4 attacks. You just saw Berucrea who caps out at 4 attacks. And in the Berucrea game, the Periris basically did nothing, but it's still a pretty interesting control deck. You can see, FFR Alkmaar here, very fun. Alkmaar did get Strolled in the event, so, it's going a lot better for Luard than it is Mujin Lord, I'll tell you that much. But I don't have a very full grasp of understanding of Luard, so I don't want to give you too many, pointers because I don't think I could do it justice. I'm sure if you comment something, someone in my comment section will come and talk to you about Luard, because Luard players really love Luard, and that's a good thing. But you can take a look at these lists. These are interesting, and I think it's fun that Luard is able to have not just one but 2 representations into top 32. I think that shows that there's some real teeth to the deck. Perhaps they are matched up very well into some of the more high aggressive strategies right now. Maybe this is a deck that can actually grind them out and scale up to the point where they can't deal with them anymore. So yeah, don't give up if you really liked Kazuma. You can still stride generation with Luard. Alright, last bit here. You may notice that Heartluru made it to top 32 and didn't make it at all to top 8. This is a strange omission almost. I think it's pretty hard to conceptualize a metagame where Vegilla, Minerva, and Toys aren't the best 3 decks in the room, but it may look like Heartluru is slowly getting phased out. What are the reasons for this? Well, I guess Heartluru is still a deck with a pretty low floor all things considered. It's got a great consistency buff in the new Rouge card that searches out your toys. Sorry, not searches out your toys, but lets you play another toy from your drop zone, usually your bunny. But Heartluru also struggles in the fact that it's a trigger checking reliant deck. And, stuff like Minerva and Berucrea are very similar, as is Deep Lands. But there are a lot of other virtues that Deep Lands has, like an extra attack, for example, 2 of which are pretty high pressure, a stun tool, those are useful. And very useful in the matchup of Vegilla, right? Berucrea and Minerva are both sacky decks, yes, with equal filter to toys, but both also drive check more. Their power thresholds are a little higher. And one thing I think that kind of keeps toys down is that they don't have a way to search out their Persona right as easy as Berucrea, as easy as, I guess Minerva doesn't search it, but stuff like Dragonic Overlord, they can run some, extra vortexes. Deep Lands has so much filter and mill and draw that you will probably run into your other copies of Regoregnus. Toys is the only deck that just doesn't really have that and really needs to see Persona right, or they just kind of fumble. Odium has 4 Persona rights in her deck, so what's the takeaway from that? Well, I don't necessarily think Toys is out the metagame or anything. I mean, it's still got a couple of tops in top 32. That's still good. Deck is fine. But I do think at least it is a signaling that the metagame is shifting ever so slowly. The meta has been very stale for a while. Vegilla, Minerva, Toys, they're always at the top tables. But now, a couple more decks are able to take their place. Minerva is looking a bit worse and worse by the set because it becomes a lot harder to declare going second when Deep Lands, Overlord, and Liael can just kind of sack you out so fast, so early. To be clear, Minerva won the whole event, so maybe not entirely true. But it's still something to consider in your matchup spreads. If you want some overall thoughts on the format this time round, as we've seen based on, as I've kind of played a couple games of it here and there, as I've watched on that stream, I think the metagame it's cool. I think come the next strategy presentation, we will probably see a hit to Vegilla. I really do think it has been a bit too long, and I think even Bushiroad is starting to recognize that the deck is a bit much. Not crazy, but certainly it's hard for other decks to shine if Vegilla is so prominent, and I think it's too new to hit Deep Land, so I don't think they will do that. I think the most we'll see is a Drag Vida hit into Vegilla, which will help in the frustrations, but probably not too much in the power threshold of deck. So if this is the meta you have to keep playing against, are you comfortable with these decks? For me, I guess I'm just happier to see new faces. Playstyle-wise, I don't think any of these decks are particularly different from one another. Maybe Draconis is more different if you play the Animus variant as a more wombo combo deck. I think Odium is cool to see as a bit more of a fragile pick, I would say. not as high consistency, but very explosive. I think it would be nice if something like Magnolia was doing a bit better, not because I have a lot of personal stake in it, though I do, but I think it would be nice to have a more control-y deck in the format. You know, at least a slower, more grindier deck. I think it's cool that Blangdmire Fantome is doing well, and even though they didn't make a top representation, I think it's nice that both the Kai and Aichi trial decks are able to do well in environments like this. It is important that our trial decks are gateways into competitive play, and even if it's for nostalgic purposes, at least if you pick up these decks, you'll have a fair shot in a big event, and I think that's cool. I think we should have more products that let players invest kind of low amounts of money to see good results and have a more enjoyable time playing competitive. That's important to me. Lastly, if you've watched up to this point and you're infuriated because this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, he doesn't know how to interpret numbers, hey, that's cool. These are just my opinions. I'm not like a super topping player, but I am someone who likes, looking at numbers, who likes watching gameplay, and likes to evaluate where I think the meta is. I don't know if I would call this metagame super healthy. I don't think there's anything super egregious to play against. I think there's nothing egregious to have to play to win. I just think it's a bit stale seeing decks from last August still being top of the charts, right? Specifically Virgilla. I think Virgilla's a bit absurd. I don't mind if there's a new topping deck. I don't mind if a deck is good for a long period of time. But certainly Virgilla has been getting better and better with every set, whether it is Dino Dragons, whether it is Gojos, that I think people are just sick of playing against it, and that can really impact how we feel when we play the game. Even if there's nothing too wrong with Virgilla, which would be one thing, but actually there is a lot wrong with Virgilla. It's super consistent, its power threshold is really high. Yeah, there's just a lot going on with that deck. But yeah, what do you guys think of the metagame? What do you guys think of this tournament? Did you watch some of the games live? Did you watch some of them? Did you watch the VOD afterwards? I'll put a link to the VOD in my description. Go check out the games. Go see for yourself what some of the decks are doing. And yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I'll also put a link to all the top 32 deck lists as well, where you can see all the deck lock codes. So feel free to peruse them yourself. Okay, that's it from me. Bye-bye! Thank you to my supporters on Ko-Fi, Lang Long, and Big Ben. Thank you for helping the Scraggy conglomerate produce more great content.